The 540 is brought to you by Star City Games weekly sale. Go to starcitygames.com/sale every week. And this week, wonderful for cubers and commander players because we have 15% off of non-basic lands. That's right, 15% off non-basic lands. And if you have a cube, which you do because you're listening to this podcast, or maybe you're interested in building one, this is the time to get those sweet, sweet sets of non-basic lands. 15% off now until April 26th at 10:59 a.m. That's starcitygames.com/sale. Come get your land on. The 540 is also brought to you by Coalesce Apparel and Design. If you want to get the coolest Magic t-shirts and hoodies and stickers, go to coalesceapparel.shop. And if you find something you like, use gift code SCG to save 10% off at checkout. That's coalesceapparel.shop. Nobody made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
What's up, everybody? Cedric Phillips here, stopping by real quick to let you know about one of Star City Games' newest podcasts, The Receivables, hosted by yours truly, alongside my partner in crime, of course, Patrick Sullivan, where the two of us discuss Magic sets, both past and present, from top to bottom. On every episode of The Receivables, you're going to hear us talk about the facts of a set, the mechanics of a set, the cycles of a set, you know, the boring stuff, before we get into some crazy stories of when we were playing Magic during the times that the set was legal. We've got a ridiculous award show where we give out awards like the Char Rumbler Award for weirdest card in a set, the Oko Thief of Crowns Award for best card in the set, and a whole bunch more, before we finally decide, hey, what card won the set and what letter grade should we give the set? It's a whole lot of fun. We're having a blast recording them. Hopefully you have the opportunity to listen to it and you enjoy it as much as we're enjoying recording them. Where can you find it? StarCityGames.com or wherever else you listen to your podcast. The Receivables every single week here at SCG.
Welcome back, everybody, to the 540, your favorite Cube podcast, and the podcast that makes Cedric Phillips' other podcasts look pretty good, which I think is really the ultimate point of the 540. Anyway, I'm Justin Parnell. You can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter, and of course, the most intelligent co-host for any podcast on the Star City Game Podcast Network. Here he is.
My name's Ryan Overturf. You can find me at Ryan Overdrive. To be clear, the claims just made by Justin do not necessarily reflect my personal beliefs and were not influenced by me in any way.
That's a hell of a disclaimer. You just roll with it.
I'm thinking about getting that on a t-shirt, actually.
Okay. Yeah. All the text would definitely fit on there.
Yeah, I'll call up Coalesce Apparel and Design, see what they can do.
There you go. Well, you know what? No one made what they wanted, so they made it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you are familiar with that. So, since no one has made the Pro Ryan Overdrive T-shirt, then we need to make it ourselves, as Coalesce is suggesting. Anyway, what we are doing today, for those of you that have clicked on this episode to listen to it without reading the title or the description, first of all, bless your heart for that kind of commitment. And second of all, just as a reminder, we are going to be talking about a smattering of retrospectives on previous cubes that have been offered on digital clients, Magic the Gathering Online and Magic Arena, of course. So we have a couple of cubes from MTGO that Ryan has more experience talking about, and then we have the Arena Cube that I have more experience talking about. So Ryan, why would we want to talk about these cubes after the fact?
Yeah, I mean, the whole reason, it's something that I've heard you talk about with your vintage cube that you designed for SCG Con, is the cube ran for a week. Sure, that was a cube for one event. For the Nega Cube, for the MenguCube, we had them on the digital platform for a week, but Cube is not some perfect finished product. These will work for us as examples of things that we have drafted that could have some things that we like, things that we didn't like, some good notes to pull from, and something that will influence our further Cube designs, as Cube is always evolving. So even though they exist as they were frozen in time, we can still build on that stuff as we progress towards the future, whether it be working on a completely different cube or even seeing these cubes show up again on these digital platforms.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's a great note. Really the evolution of cube design, just conceptually, you always are looking back at what has come before to see what you can use to design your cube better or make it a different experience or a more refined experience. So I think it is important, even though, in the case of these two Magic Online cubes, it's not even possible for us to make this our podcast content while these are still live, just because they run for such a short period of time, and the lists are made available roughly 2 minutes before the first pod launches. They require you to actually sign up, and then they will tell you the cube list for the first time. That's how close to the vest Wizards keeps it.
Yeah, and when these drop, they get the list out on Tuesday. My article goes up on Wednesday. Like, that's a crunch itself for me to get those articles out.
Yeah, for sure. And we're recording this podcast on the weekend, and then is releasing on Thursday. So this cube, by the time, if you listen to this the day of, it is already a brief memory, and probably a more distant one if you listen to it in the future. For the Arena Cube, it is here for longer. Now, obviously, you might be familiar with a Magic the Gathering set called Strixhaven, and that's obviously for the people that did not listen to the last 2 weeks, because they would have heard us say the word Strixhaven a lot. But
and
when
many
Strixhaven
other words.
And many other words, probably the most words per podcast episode, which is appropriate because Strixhaven has the most words per card.
Mm-hmm.
But the Arena Cube is probably going to come out directly before a new standard set comes out, which means it's pretty likely we're going to be talking about that standard set instead of the Arena Cube. Now, that's not a guarantee going forward, but that is kind of the timetable that Wizards likes to release that cube into, which makes sense because it's the end of a format. You want to present something fun for people to do, since maybe they're not drafting. Maybe not. You're not drafting Kaldheim as much anymore for the average Arena player, even though Kaldheim is a wonderful format. So that's where they're going to slant that, and it's going to be difficult for us to talk about it in a timely manner. But fortunately, the Arena Cube probably is going to change less over time than all of these Magic Online Cube offerings, especially ones that are more specialized like we have today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, a lot more grounded with a smaller number of sets. I guess with all this Jumpstart and historic, what is it, compendium? Is that? I have no idea what it's called. Anthologies, historic anthologies. That stuff can shake up Arena Cube, but it's felt very similar every time I've drafted in the multiple iterations.
Yes. I would say that this time has been the most changes since Jumpstart, but even still, it is still roughly the same cube. The lessons you can take from this past time to the next time will be the same as the ones you could take from 2 times ago to this last time. So,
definitely.
So with that, you want to get into it, or do you have anything else to talk about here?
Well, we got a lot of cubes to get to, so we may as well move this show on the road.
Let's do it. Let's move the show on the road. We're going to take our first ad break, and then when we come back, the Nega Cube. Have some extra cards laying around that you want to get rid of? Go to StarCityGames.com/sell. It has never been easier to turn your cards into cash, or if you're looking to outfit your cube or commander deck with some new favorites, get a 30% trade-in bonus when you choose Store Credit. No matter what your collection looks like, we have a method for you. Want to see exactly what every card you have is worth? Check out our buy list. Don't have time for that? Stick it on a box. Send it to us, and we'll make you an offer with our ship and sell program. Or if you want a more personal touch, make your way to the Star City Game Center in Roanoke, Virginia to sit down with a buyer just like the old days. with the fastest turnaround time in the industry. Get an offer in under 4 days when you go to starcitygames.com/sell. Selling has never been easier. Ryan, last month, the end of the month, the Magic Online Cube of the Week on Magic Online, which is what I just said.
Good place for it.
Respectively, thank you. Was the Nega Cube. What was the Nega Cube?
What the Nega Cube was what the other major Magic Online cubes aren't. That is to say, the Nega Cube was designed and constructed with the restriction that no card featured in the Magic Online Vintage, Legacy, or Modern cubes were allowed to be put into this cube.
It sounds like when you say it's exactly what the other cubes were not, it sounds like a very loose marketing tactic for this cube, but it is the actual factual definition of what this cube is.
Yes, yeah, it was a good line. Wizards of the Coast. If you heard that, you can use that. That's on the house. It's out there.
Wow.
But yeah, that is literally what this cube was. Let me double check the numbers here. I think that there's in total 899 cards among those 3 cubes that were not allowed to be put into this cube.
Okay, that's a sizable amount, especially when it's probably 899 of the 1,000 best cards in Magic potentially.
Yes, yeah, and that's going to show up in a lot of things. Big time flagship cards that Cryptic Command, Counterspell, Role Players, Ponder, Preordain, Snapcaster Mage, Dual Lands, Fetch Lands, Shock Lands. There's a lot of stuff that you see in a lot of cubes that this cube could not touch.
The thing that I think about first, it's funny you say that, is the fixing, because that is the most ubiquitous and non-offensive thing for changes between cubes, because basically most cubes are just trying to have the best fixing possible, and it's not necessarily a huge feature of the cube. Mm-hmm. But when you're removing the access of what is considered the best cycles of fixing and the best fixing lands, and it does start to become more notable.
Yeah, that was one of the first things I checked when I went to work writing my preview article for this cube, because the lands you put in your cube actually pretty heavily influence the type of archetypes you can support. Mm-hmm. The big spot that really shows up is how well can you draft a consistent 2-color aggressive deck. That's really based on how many of your lands can fix your mana and enter the battlefield untapped. So that's a very big thing that I check first.
Big time. Yeah, and that's just a good thing to check for cubes in general, but obviously more critical here because a lot of those have been used up. Those come into play untapped lands.
Mm-hmm. And there's still some stuff. This cube got pain lands, which are pretty good for aggressive decks, and also those are really nice if you're trying to specifically support aggressive decks because controlling decks are less interested in them. They don't want to take the damage. But then the other untapped cycle here is filter lands, like Sunken Runes and Graven Cairns, which tend to not be great for aggressive decks, even though they do enter untapped. You can't cast your 1-drops off of them.
Yeah. Yep, definitely. Those are always lands that scare me just in general. Lands that just don't make mana on their own. I don't know. I've been buried by Stone Rain and friends too many times in my life.
This cube, don't think that there was a lot of that going on. So there's that anyway, but
yeah, that's good. Yeah, it's especially good when the lands you are working with are maybe a little bit less than.
Right.
You probably don't want to encourage people to be able to take out the minimal fixing that you have access to that's reasonable.
Mm-hmm. And then after that, you have Pathways here, which is among the better lands that are still in the cube. Those actually support either controlling or aggressive decks. They play pretty well. As a matter of fact, Pathways are in all 3 of the cubes we're going to talk about today. They're in the Nega Cube, the MenguCube, and in the Arena Cube. Yeah. And I've liked the way that they have played pretty well. I'm going to say this, though. I am really sick of seeing them digitally, because I have no idea what any of them are until I mouse over them and make them large. I just have no clue what's on the other side of any of them. In paper, it's a little bit easier because it's easier to read the little colored text box that tells you what's on the other side. But I have gotten a real headache playing with these digitally.
Maybe it must not be as bad on Arena as it is on Magic Online. But I think that's probably, largely the point of Arena is the UI for that type of thing is a little bit improved from where you have on Magic Online, which is akin to playing Magic on a spreadsheet.
Yeah, some of it's my fault because I learn Magic cards primarily through their art. Until I can recognize the art at a glance, I would not say that I really know a card well enough to play games around it intuitively. I have to do a lot more checking the card out, reading the card, inspecting the card, and the pathways. I do a lot of that learning playing paper Magic. It's a lot easier for me to internalize and memorize things when I'm holding them physically as opposed to looking at them on a screen.
Yeah, and you've probably never played with these pathway lands. Have you held a pathway land, a single one in your hand? I mean, obviously,
I've held some, but I haven't really played paper games with them.
That's what I mean. Like, it held them in the sense of like you're playing a game of Magic, rather than not just like I'm buying or selling this.
Yeah, it was like I was cracking boosters for my store's inventory.
Yes, yeah. Yeah, but that's not going to help you. It helps you remember, when you have it physically and tangibly in your hands. I totally understand that. I'm the same way. So tell me about the Nega Cube then. What do we need to know? Because I have not drafted this cube. I have looked at the cube list, and I actually was quite impressed by what was made up of what is kind of, I don't want to say the leftovers, but yeah, also what was made up of the leftovers.
So obviously, the cube ends up almost necessarily being at a lower power level than something like, certainly Vintage Cube, something like Legacy or Modern Cube. And in a weird way, I'll kind of break this down. It's a little bit more about archetypes, but also a little bit more about individually powerful cards.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a mixed bag, and I'll get into why that is. But there are very concrete themes that are hammered out. Natalie Weizenbaum, the designer of the cube, wrote a pretty good breakdown of this on Wizards of the Coast website when the cube went live. You have some of the artifacts matter stuff spread across some of the colors. You have a blink theme spread across some of the colors, a sacrifice theme, reanimator theme, and then like green ramp is also kind of its own theme, which goes from 1 to 5 colors. And so you have these decks that are driven somewhat by this archetype focus, where, in my opinion, the sacrifice deck was actually quite good when I was trying to draft a deck thematically. That was one that I felt that I could reliably draft. But on the other side of it, because of this restriction, you still end up with some cards where you're like, whoa, it's weird that this isn't in other cubes. For example, I think Llanowar Visionary is like a slam dunk Vintage Cube card. It's just a solid card advantage mana ramp. 2 green, 2/2, enters the battlefield, you draw a card, it taps for a green. Like, if you can produce green mana, this card will often perform better than Solemn Simulacrum, a card that we're all pretty happy playing most of the time.
Yeah.
Minimally, at least the Legacy Cube should have this card, right? But then you see some other stuff where you're just like, oh, I understand why that's not in any cube, and I don't really want to play it in this one either. Like, Starnheim Courser is a 3-mana 2/2 flyer that says your artifacts and enchantments cost 1 less, which is like, is that even other than flavor text? I don't know. I don't want to play this card.
Yeah. It's fun going through this cube list because, honestly, I literally go through it and I'm like, I think it's made up of probably like 90% of cards that have been in my cube in the past, but then were bumped out because other things were better.
Yeah, there's definitely some stuff that really jumps off the list. Like Mikaeus the Lunarch is a card that's awesome. Just like a very good white aggressive creature that scales early or late. There's another really big all-timer in the cube, in Una, Queen of the Fae, which just like used to be in every cube. I have a lot of memories of just untapping and winning no matter what happens with this card.
So many of the cards in this cube were in the very first cube that I built. Like, I got one for you that this is to prove my age and probably not in the best direction. But the very first cube that I built, I had, in an effort to try to make black aggressive decks a thing, I had Blind Creeper in my cube.
Oh my.
And Blind Creeper is in this cube.
That
Blind
one,
Creeper
I think, made one draft in my Pauper Cube.
It's not good. It is not good. Now I'm talking, this is a dozen years ago. Blind Creeper wasn't the thing. Blind Creeper was not good then. I'm not defending myself. But there were not 12 additional years of cards to make it more embarrassing than it is. Blind Creeper, because no one should know what this card does. 1 black, it's a zombie beast that is a 3/3. Whenever a player plays a spell, Blind Creeper gets -1/-1 until end of turn. So, theoretically, best case scenario, you have on attacking on turn 3 a 3/3 for 2. That can die if your opponent has any sort of semblance of a good turn without aiming a removal spell at it.
Yes.
Yeah, anyway. I don't want to talk. We've spent way too much talking about Blind Creeper anyway, so.
And it also contrasts in a very comical fashion because one of the louder things about this cube is, I mentioned I really like the sacrifice theme. You have many greatest of all time, just classically powerful cards for sacrifice decks in this cube. Priest of Forgotten Gods, Bloodsoaked Champion, like these are cards that have a high constructed pedigree. Obviously, they show up and perform in cube. You have Goblin Bombardment, which just used to be in some of the higher power cubes and like just is an awesome, powerful card.
Yeah. I'll never not have Goblin Bombardment in my powered cube, but I just love that card. It's literally one of my favorite cards in Magic, so.
Mm-hmm. And then that also opens up, just with these themes that are underexplored, you get some new cards that work well in these themes that are open, that show up in this cube that wouldn't otherwise. I think my favorite card that shows up in this cube that we have not seen on the digital cubes before is Jury, Master of the Review. There's a card from Commander Legends that I wrote. I picked this for my top 10. I don't remember where I put it exactly, but this card really stood out to me as an awesome cube card. Red and a black for a 1/1 legendary human shaman. Whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a +1/+1 counter on Jury. When Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. This is a really awesome card in your Goblin Bombardment deck.
Yeah, it's a similar to Dread Horde Haste guy.
Butcher? Is that the one?
I don't know. I legitimately am blanking on it. Yes, but essentially where it grows bigger, then when it dies, it can ping something. But man, I'm just going through this list. They go really deep on the sacrifice deck.
Oh yeah.
Like really, really deep. Like this seems to be like a very, very primary thing between red and black, both together and individually.
Yes.
Yeah,
and it also kind of spreads over the cube. There's like a token theme kind of resonant throughout it that also plays well with the blink theme. Creatures enter the battlefield and make tokens. So either you can use those tokens to sacrifice in your sacrifice theme, or your creatures entering the battlefield, you can blink them and get more tokens. There's a lot of ways to take advantage of that sort of thing. So kind of some themes that overlap in more than one direction, which makes for some pretty cool stuff going on.
Definitely. A good thing to note here is green sure has a lot of good cards because there's a lot of good cards in this cube, and that means that they're not in other cubes. If green's got so many good cards in this, that just maybe it's just a high concentration of the same cards for Magic Online is using for all of its modern legacy vintage cubes for green. That could be it, but man, I've just felt like green over the last few years has just gotten so deep on what is a playable cube card. Yes.
Yeah, and like one that really jumps out to me is Wild Growth, which just a 1 mana acceleration spell that cannot be hit by a cheap creature removal spell. Chant land, makes the land tap for an additional green. That was a card when I did my preview article. I identified it as potentially the most powerful card in the cube.
Mm-hmm.
And I will say that it definitely was a card that positively influenced my win percentage, like that card in my deck versus not. Though, because of this sort of dynamic where some of the cards are at a lower power level. You know, they're the cards that nobody wanted, and some of the cards are just the cards that used to be traditionally powerful for Cube and don't show up anymore. That actually kind of lent itself. I was surprised with something that was different in this Cube relative to how I usually approach Cube, is I found that Haymakers, your 5 and 6 mana spells, the best Haymakers had much higher value over replacement than they usually do. Because you have some really good 5 and 6 mana cards. Take, for example, Tendershoot Dryad. It's just an awesome Cube card. That one's kind of a house on the Arena Cube.
Yeah, I think this card's great just in general.
Mm-hmm. And you compare that to Mycoloth, which is like more of an investment card, a little harder to cast, requires you to be doing something, and just you would take Tendershoot Dryad 100 times out of 100 over Mycoloth.
Definitely.
And then like in the blue slot, for that reason, because it tended to be that the best card was so much better than the second best card, Confiscate. I never saw a game where the player casting Confiscate lost.
Yeah, I was, man, it's so crazy. I was literally in the blue enchantment section as you were talking about that and looking at those. Mind Control, Confiscate. Primordial Mist also seems just like a slam dunk card in this cube. I think this is a pretty reasonable cube card for higher powered cubes even than this, but this card, if I had to guess, this seems quite powerful.
Yes, yeah, that's another one of the ones that just a very good card showing up in an environment that has some very good cards and some weaker on average cards, and so a card like that can really clean up.
Yeah, Green's answer for Primordial Mist is Gutter Grime, which you do not know the Oracle text on, and I don't want you to lie to everyone on the podcast and say
I can tell you that I've had this in a draft deck, but that was
I believe that you might know what it does
ago.
I might believe you know what it does ish.
Yeah, that's where I'd put it.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, this is there's a lot of there's certainly a lot of cards that are either like, I'm surprised this is not in other cubes, and this just seems slightly more powerful than some of the other things that you are doing. You've outlined a lot of them. Also, Embercleave is in this cube.
Embercleave rules.
I mean, I'm pro Embercleave. I live the pro Embercleave life. There's a lot of people that complain about Embercleave. I'm not one of them. I might complain about it as it's dealing me lethal damage, but then I go about my day and try to be the one doing the Embercleaving in the future. And I kind of just take that responsibility. You know, if I'm getting Embercleave, that's on me. It's not on my opponent. I let them do that to me. I will note that previously you have gone as far as to say, regarding the card like Wild Growth, which is Utopia Sprawl, that if someone cast Utopia Sprawl on turn 1, that not only are you going to lose the game, you should concede immediately. You should sell the Magic collection,
not you should,
and never come back to playing Magic ever again.
Time to retire. They got the Sprawl.
Exactly. Just pack it up. We had a good run until now, but everybody's day come to an end at the hands of Utopia Sprawl at some point. So, Wild Growth. If Utopia Sprawl is that good, I mean, Wild Growth is not as good as Utopia Sprawl because it is not fixing any of your color issues, but I would say a lot of the power is still there. So, you said I initially pegged this as one of the most powerful cards in the cube, but how many times did you put that into practice?
So I only played this cube, I think, about 10 times.
Okay.
And
it's a reasonable amount of times.
Yeah. And Wild Growth, I'll say that I trophied with and because of Wild Growth, but it didn't carry. And part of that is what I was saying about the value over replacement for the actual high mana cards, the win conditions.
Mm-hmm.
Cards like Wild Growth perform better in modern Legacy Vintage Cube, where there are no restrictions on power level outside of, the absolute power outliers, because the power band's a little bit tighter. And so if you're just casting cards that cost 1 more, it generally means they're more powerful than your opponents. Doing that head schedule is very good. In the Nega Cube, I regularly found myself wanting to play 18 lands, because Stumbling was so punishing because you just had to get out to be able to cast whatever your best card was, which tended to cost 6 mana. And if you weren't getting there and your opponent was, you were in trouble. So if you were hitting your mana drops, if both players are hitting their mana drops and one has wild growth, that's a tiebreaker. You're going to get out in front, you're going to win the game. But I wouldn't like play it over a land, which is what you start to do in the very high power level formats.
Yes. Yeah, because this is not a format where the game will end before you have a chance to play all of your lands.
Right.
Where that is a concern in higher powered cubes. Okay. What other notes do you have on the Nega Cube? What are you taking away from this?
So my big takeaway, I loved the idea on first read because it's an idea I would never have. So it's very exciting for me when I'm somebody who's super invested in Cube, got a lot of my own ideas that I've put into practice, a lot of stuff on the shelf that I want to do someday, a lot of other people's stuff I tried, and I read this and I think, wow, I would have never had that idea. That's very cool. Mm-hmm. And then got down to drafting it. The charm faded some as you got into more packs where it's like, okay, this is the C list. I got the dregs in this booster draft.
You got tired of drafting Vizier of Deferment?
Yeah, that one was not my favorite. I don't love seeing Viridian Emissary in my booster packs.
Yeah.
And so I think what I would actually really like if they were going to revisit this cube, get Natalie on the phone, say, we would like to redo the cube, but here's what you do. You maintain your themes. You are allowed to put any card you want in. So keep it true to form, maintain the sacrifice theme, maintain the token theme, keep everything that thematically makes the cube what it is, remove the restriction, and let's see what this could look like there. And then you have a really fun comparison, which that would increase enjoyment, I believe, for people that drafted it the first time as a comparison to the second time. You're like, oh, so this is what we could do with this without that restriction. Be a fun comparison. And then also I think that would have more broad appeal if it was just, it's more fun to play with cards that are more consistently powerful.
For sure. I think the biggest area that would help is probably going to be the mana. Because this cube goes pretty deep on 2-colored cards, which is something that I have potentially found difficult for lower powered cubes because of the mana. You are not as incentivized to do that. And, every section has 7, 8, 9 different 2-color cards, which I think is fine, and I think is good. If you're trying to... The heart of this cube is really encouraging you to do so, but when your fixing is rough, that makes it more difficult to... I guess I feel like a lot of these multicolored cards are probably also going last along with the Viridian Emissaries and the Viziers of Deferment. Pretty much all the V cards, it seems like, are just a step below.
Very weak letter. Exception, Varric's Bladewing. That's a serviceable V.
Yeah. I imagine if you cast Vorinclex, you'll probably win the game.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Notably, Frostlinks does not have a V in it, but it is in this cube, and Ryan thinks that card is terrible, as we found out last week.
I did not and would not put Frostlinks in my deck.
Oh, man. I just like Frostlinks.
I like that in Core Set Limited. I see this is the Magic 2015 printing. Sign me up for that.
Sure. I like what you were saying about removing the restriction. And I think when people listen to that, they're like, well, if you do that, what doesn't that take away the identity of the cube? And it doesn't have to, because the designer of this cube, I imagine, would have enough restraint to wield that power in a way that is positive to this cube rather than removing its identity.
Here's another free marketing tool. Call it the Mega Cube. Frankly, it's too perfect. Here's another shower thought that I had about revisiting this cube. Something that is not fun or engaging about the restriction is Vintage Cube has it, you can't have it, right? And there's some weird stuff where, like, Land of War Visionary is in this cube, Yava Maya Elders in the Vintage Cube. Okay, this seems backwards. What's going on here? And like this cube as a sacrifice theme, it would be pretty cool to have a Theomancer in this cube. That card's in the Vintage Cube and is kind of a turd. So it would be cool, and this is like probably way too much. It's more than they're willing to put into this sort of thing. But it would be really cool from my perspective if there was just like a draft where it's just like, this is the Nega Cube versus Vintage Legacy Modern Cube draft, where the Nega Cube is coming for your cards that are thematic, and you can pick some of the Nega Cube's powerful cards, and we can trade one for one, and so that the environments are actually negotiating against each other rather than this cube being the leftovers.
I really like that, because honestly, I was like, man, you know what really sucks? Is that, you know, with Wizards going to have all of this data when they're running these cubes, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's just going to inform them of the cards that are in this Nega Cube, and then they're going to basically get like called up to the big leagues, and then the Nega Cube's not going to have access to them anymore, and that's messed up.
Right.
Like Landwar Visionary, they're going to be like, wow, this card is pretty high win rate when people are playing this card. Why don't we put this in a different cube? And then the Nega Cube doesn't get it anymore, and that's bullshit.
Yeah. If the update every time, if they revisit this cube, it's like, okay, so here's the 12 cards we can't play anymore.
Yeah.
And here's the replacements.
These got called up. These got called up to the big leagues. They're no longer in the minor leagues. It's the big leagues now, but now we can't play them. Yeah. So I'm team Nega Cube, and it seems like, honestly, I think this probably should come back. But I also now love your idea that you just stated about the draft for cards.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. That would be fun.
I don't expect to see it at all, but I would love to.
No, but now you've put that idea out in the universe, and I'll be disappointed if I get anything else. Such is life, I guess.
And I have that effect on people.
Ryan, anything else that you want to talk about the Nega Cube before we move on to the MenguCube?
No, I think I kind of said my piece on this one. Cool idea, fun cube. If we're going to see it again, and I would like to see it again, I would like to see some kind of polish that makes it less about just stuff you can't do and leans in a little bit more into stuff you can do.
Okay, fair enough. All right, we are going to take our second break for the day and be back in just a moment.
What's up, gamers? Taking a quick break from the pod here to let you know about the upcoming Magic set, Strixhaven School of Mages. Strixhaven is the most elite university in the multiverse. That means more elite than Tolarian Academy. That means more elite than Wizard School from Homelands. It's got them all beat. It features 5 colleges which battle it out with their own takes on magic. And from what we know about the set, that means we're going to see heavy representation of all 5 enemy color pairs. And for my money, that means blue-red cards. Obviously, it means wizards. There's more than enough to sell me already just there. And you can pre-order your Strixhaven Seal products now. Go to starcitygames.com/previews to do so. Strixhaven School of Mages. Magic goes to college.
All right, Magic Online Spotlight Cube number 2, the MenguCube.
I was really surprised to see this one.
Yeah, so tell us about this one.
So this is Andrea Mingucci's cube, his 540 card vintage cube. So usually when we see Spotlight series, the contrast here is just really stark from the week to week, right? We had the Nega Cube, which is no thank you, can't play any of the cards that the other high power cube wants. And this is just Andrea Mingucci's vintage cube. So it is different from the Magic Online vintage cube in a number of very significant ways. I was just expecting something a little bit more far off of the beaten path, and it was cool to see. I will say, shout out to Andrea Mingucci. Awesome face for the game. Super positive. Wizards probably couldn't have picked a better person to win the Mythic Invitational because he immediately just like bought Black Bordered Power and a bunch of cool Magic cards and just tweets about that stuff all the time. Tweets a lot of cube photos, that sort of thing. Really awesome guy.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine if, especially for something that you're able to advertise on a different platform, that you can turn Andrea Mingucci's public love of cube into a Spotlight cube. Seems like a a pretty solid idea for them to be able to do that.
Yeah, if they were going to let anybody do a Spotlight Cube and it was just different Vintage Cube, very happy it was Andrea.
So, what this cube is different than a cube that I have drafted before, where it is not unlike your Grixis cube, Brian, where you are simply forsaking the two worst colors in Magic. This cube doesn't do that. It lets you play with all of them, but it makes it clear that some of them are worse, but you still can use them if you want to.
Yeah, they're still there. There's just fewer of them. So that's actually something they've been doing with the Magic Online Vintage Cube for a number of years. I think like more than 5 years.
Yeah, maybe not quite to the percentages we see here.
Right. Yeah, this is even ramping
this
that
is an
up
extreme.
even more.
Yeah, it looks like the greatest discrepancy is there are 56 black cards and 89 blue cards in this cube, which is a massive discrepancy for a 540 card cube.
Yes, and so this is another thing where you kind of want to look at some stuff that's going on in terms of mana fixing. That is also biased, skewed towards blue. There are more blue dual lands than other colors, and then that's focused among some specific stuff. It's imbalanced kind of based on these numbers, and that also has the effect where it's going to be more difficult to be monocolor non-blue than it is in the regular Vintage Cube, which I have been a long-time proponent of mono white, mono red, and mono green in that cube. So this one definitely shook that up.
Yeah. Yeah, it makes it... Oh, sorry, there's actually one less white card. There's 55 white cards out of 56 black cards. Yeah, it seems difficult because you're going to have to essentially string together enough cards to be able to do that archetype, and it's not something you're going to be able to force because, obviously, you're going to be using 360 cards out of a 540 card cube, so there's a whole 180 cards that you might have access to, and you don't know what the percentage of those white cards or red cards could be.
And this
you have to really take that into consideration.
This was a big point that I made in my preview article, is not only are there fewer total white and red cards in MenguCube as opposed to Vintage Cube, there's also just fewer, some of those slots came from 1-drops. There's fewer total white and red aggressive 1-drops, and there's more Boros lands. So the setup is, if you're going to be aggressive, you're going to more often be Boros in this environment.
Yes, yeah. Which I mean, I can get behind that. Honestly, I truly love the concept of this cube because it's not even a concept. This is literally Andrea Mingucci saying, me and my friends, my play group, these are the cards that we love to play, and we're just going to make sure that we fit all of the cards we love to play in the cube, and then we'll figure the rest out and make the rest of it work with the mana and how the color breakdown is. And there's something very pure about that for how a cube is meant to be experienced.
Yeah, exactly. And this is what your cube at home should be following as a guideline. You should be doing the things that you and your friends enjoy doing together. And even if you don't take these specific notes, if you have this cube here where it's breaking some quote-unquote rules, more blue cards, the fixing is not symmetrical by color pair. It's just like there's more fixing for the color pairs we like playing more often. There's some asymmetry with signets and talismans. Both are present in some colors, neither present in some colors, one or the other in others. And it's just like, take your cube, make it your own is the big takeaway here.
Yeah, very much so. And that doesn't mean you have to go to these extremes to so like heavily support a color or archetype like this is, but just that it's a good example of you can make your cube whatever you want, and it doesn't matter when you put it into a spreadsheet or a cube website what it looks like, as long as it's fun and it's functionally playable. Then those are the only two factors that truly matter. Yep,
exactly. And yeah, I've read a number of different cube articles, played a lot of cubes over the years, and a lot of focus, a lot of the questions people ask, like when people ask me about how to design their cube, they're like, how many lands do I need? How many cards of each color? And it's just like, that stuff is the stuff that you are supposed to do your own thing. You can do whatever you want. If you ask me those questions, I will answer with at least one of my own questions, because some of it is math, but it's math towards your goals. That's not the kind of stuff that I want to tell you, because that's the kind of stuff that should be accommodating the other things that you want to do. So I very much am in the camp where when I create stuff about my cube, I'll tell you, this is my experience that led me to do this. This is why I like this. And when I talk about how other people do their cubes, I want to highlight these are the pivot points. These are some ways you can do this differently.
Yeah. What are the things that you care about the most? How do we make sure those things work?
So if you come to Cube at my house and we're playing Grixis Cube, you're not going to see a Hull Breacher in a pack ever. Because I hate it. But Andrea Mingucci likes Hull Breacher. So you get the pleasure of having every game where that card shows up be decided by Hull Breacher in this cube, which was my experience in this run.
Yeah. What other cards? Were there other, did you feel like there were other cards that just flat out made the game entirely hinge on their existence?
Not more than you usually see. I did play one league where two of my opponents were playing Splinter Twin combo and the third was playing Time Vault combo. And there are a couple more cards that lend themselves to those combos. For example, Village Bellringer is in white here, which you don't see in the regular Vintage Cube. So it's just more stuff that can combo with a Splinter Twin or a Kiki Jiki. And that's stuff that I don't personally generally go too far into. However, I watch Cube streams, I read people's tweets about Cube. I know people love Splinter Twin, so that was probably a very good thing to do for the popularity of this cube.
I think, as an aside, I think that people don't like Splinter Twin as much as they think that they do, but they like to think that they like Splinter Twin because it's not something they can have, so there's no downside in joining in and saying, I love Splinter Twin, unban Splinter Twin in Modern, etc. But I have no way to prove that. It's just a feeling that I get.
I mean, I think that when people say they like Splinter Twin, you should take that at face value. They're not necessarily saying they enjoy the gameplay, right? It's not some critical evaluation of formats are better when they're Splinter Twin. They're just saying they like Splinter Twin, and that's fine.
Yeah,
I got nothing to say about that.
I think that they are lying because Splinter Twin is a rare 4-mana aura from Rise of the Eldrazi. And if you're just saying, that's just what I like, rather than I like the gameplay of Splinter Twin, one of those two statements is probably not authentic. That's what I'm saying.
I'm going to say this. This is a little bit of a cube hot take. I mean, it is literally true of my experience, but other people are going to have different experiences, which makes it a hot take. And even if they have the same experiences, people certainly have different perceptions about them. I win way more in Vintage Cube with blue-red cards than I do with any blue-red combo. I always lose to my deck when my blue-red deck is Splinter Twin or Through the Breach or Sneak Attack. The cards just don't come together in the right order for me. Whereas, like, if I'm casting Counterspell, if I'm casting Mystic Confluence and just doing anything else, like just any creature with power and toughness, or some Planeswalker, I win those games way more than I win the combo games. However, my opponents literally always peel Splinter Twin on the perfect turn, so I understand why those players would be more interested in playing it.
Yeah, it's an interesting spot because playing Splinter Twin in Cube, where you have to like work to assemble this combo because there's the drafting portion, and you're like, oh, we can do this thing. We build the deck around this. That's fine, but I think a lot of people that say they like Splinter Twin are like translating over that into 60 card Magic, and I think that they are. It's fun to say because no one can prove you wrong. No one can say, all right, you really want Splinter Twin and Pestermite as a combo in Modern? Well, here's what it looks like if you have that. Because that's not going to happen. So anyway, that's my side on Splinter Twin. I like it in cubes that are not mine.
Sure.
Like it's nice to every once in a while play a cube with Splinter Twin combo because I generally like to stay away from 2-card infinite combos personally, because while sometimes there is a fun mini game in the pod when you were drafting to assemble that if you see one spot or the other, I do not like the ability to simply just fall into that without having to make some sacrifices or jumping through hoops in the draft, which happens a non-zero amount of times. And you could say, well, Justin, wouldn't you say the same thing about generally powerful cards? I would say yes. However, those are individual cards, and everyone has the chance to draft those. But having a 2-card infinite combo that does not take you any effort to draft and assemble, I think over a long time or a many number of games becomes less interesting the more times that you see it pulled off. So I personally like to avoid two-card combos, 2-card infinite combos in my cubes, but I enjoy playing with cubes that have them as long as I can walk away from those cubes and not have to continually play them.
Yeah, it's not something I'm necessarily interested in the upkeep of.
Yeah. Just my little side on 2-card combos. Glad they exist, not super for me.
That's fair. And I'm going to say that league where I played against 2 twin decks and a Time Vault deck, like, I did not have all of my cubing out of my system, but I did not jump back into the queues for this cube right after that. Yeah, that was it for that day.
Yep. Yeah. Had enough cube for today. Not quite someone played a Utopia Sprawl on turn 1 against you, but enough. Not quite as offensive as that.
Well, they're both experiences involving auras that I can't beat, so there's a lot of overlap from one to the other.
There totally is. Look, I agree with that. I agree with that notion. This is I honestly believe that, and this is another hot take, I think in just about every single cube, and I literally mean just like all cubes across the board, that the most powerful card type is enchantment. Because you can just interact with it at least.
Yeah, I mean, it's the sort of thing where, like, ask anybody worth their salt that has worked in game design, and this is a question that, like, Rosewater has talked about. You have to remove one card type from Magic, which contributes, like, both the least positive and the most negative. Like, enchantment is the one you get rid of, and it's not close.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I actually think Mark Rosewater would say instant, because he would give Sorcery's Flash.
Sure, Sorcery's Flash, like, that's, like, the lazy band-aid kind of thing or whatever. Like that card type is kind of superfluous. But enchantment is the context
of the game.
Enchantment brings some actively negative stuff with it, where it's like
quite often actually.
Some people really like it, or like, yeah, my opponent has an enchantment and I have a disenchant. I'm very clever. It's like, well, you had to play disenchant and sometimes they don't draw it. Like, this gameplay actually sucks a lot. This is actually really horrible.
Yeah. Yeah, and in cubes, a lot of times enchantments are like, there's the least enchantments of any card type, which means that contextually you want to provide the least ways to kill them, because then if you don't do that, you're just providing a lot of air. There's a lot of cards that just don't do anything. So you got to minimize the number of those enchantment killing cards, but then the most powerful of those enchantments often take over the games in the games that they are, in. I think that anytime if I see opposition in a cube, I always think that's one of the top 5 most powerful cards in the cube. It doesn't even matter the context of the cube, but just the general makeup of how enchantments play compared to the rest of the cube and how you have to interact with them, that always makes that card so powerful, because it is like an unstoppable force if you can't remove it immediately.
Yeah, it's incredibly powerful.
What do you not have creatures in your cube? That's the only way. If you're like, I got opposition here, but don't worry, I've powered it down.
I have
7 creatures each color.
I have a different camp I put opposition in. It's in a category of cards I call somebody's losing, somebody's unhappy. If a player is casting opposition, somebody's unhappy. Either they don't have any creatures and it's horrible, or the opponent has lost the game on the spot. There's some games that exist in the middle, but you can't make it common. It's incredibly uncommon for games that exist in the middle, and both of the games on the extremes there are super unfun.
Yeah. That being said, I like opposition, but it's because I like opposition. It's because I remember that card from my childhood. Playing an opposition.
Yeah, it's a big nostalgic thing. Like, some people love opposition deranged tournament, and it was really funny.
I
was talking to a friend about opposition in her cube, and
that is how I learned about in real life. That is how I first encountered opposition. Not me playing that, but someone playing that against me.
You wanted your turn.
What now?
You wanted your turn. You saw that happen. You're like, I want to do that to somebody.
Yeah, I did. I definitely did. And I was playing like this dumpy mono green deck. And they go opposition, and I was very excited because it seemed like it was going to do nothing. I was like, cool. And then they played Deranged Tournament, and I was like, wait a second. So I can't attack with creatures, and then when I don't have those creatures anymore, or you play more creatures, then I can't use my lands. And now I can do nothing. But you're also not killing me. But I can't concede because I'm a 12-year-old. So I don't know how to escape the situation.
It's not in my nature.
Yeah, I don't understand what to do. Okay, that's my side on opposition. You were saying something, and I totally cut you off.
I was, yeah. So,
and I think hopefully it's not gone.
No, it's not super interesting, but it's also not gone. I'll say it because I started saying it. But they're saying, I like opposition a lot. I think that I actually probably provoked them. I probably said, I hate opposition. I wish it wasn't in your queue, something like that. That's the kind of thing I would say probably. Yeah. And then they tweeted something about opposition, and somebody said how much they liked it. They tagged me, like, see, people like opposition. I was like, yeah, I know that people like it. I hate it.
Sure. So this is just such an interesting cube to me, not in the existence of it. I think the existence of it actually makes a lot of sense, like in context with like a cube that people like actually play with, like a play group plays with. I can conceptualize how this got to the point it did pretty easily. But to appear on Magic Online as a million drafts, not a million, I don't know how many times people draft any cube on Magic Online. I have no context of what that number is, but to have this as a cube when you're going through this data, because the data doesn't mean anything for this cube, right?
I mean, I disagree with that statement, but expand on what you mean by that.
Sure. So, you have this cube is largely put together of things that the cube owner and the cube playgroup wants to be doing. Like that is the most important first, second, and third thing. So when you say this card is underperforming or overperforming, well, there's no context of what that could mean. What if you're like, okay, well, we've looked at it and we feel like Nissa Vastwood Seer seems like it is performing less than, it was like one of the lowest performing cards in the cube. I don't think that's the case. I'm just picking a random card. Mm-hmm. So you take out Nissa Vastwood, you're like, well, maybe we want to cut Nissa Vastwood Seer. What makes the most sense to put in? Well, another blue card, because that's what's supported. And if you follow, I just feel like if you follow the data on this cube that Magic Online is going to provide, then it's just going to lead you to go farther and farther away from the identity you were trying to put together in the first place. Because what if you're just like, well, I love Nissa Vastwood Seer. Andrea Mingucci loves Nissa Vastwood Seer.
You're saying taking data
is
win
irrelevant
percentages it doesn't really matter so much to you
Correct.
if you're saying, I like this thing. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I thought you might have been
cube
saying,
is
like,
where it is.
informing the regular vintage cube with information for this. And that's an interesting conversation to open up as well.
No, I actually think that data is very valuable. But
there are some things that are different, though, that do cloud it a little bit, because the rules of engagement for MenguCube are a bit different from the rules of engagement for the traditional Magic Online Vintage Cube. There's less stuff that is about small attrition, and there's more stuff going on here that is kind of like gotcha, kind of over the top, trying to slam the door, more prison-y than directly interactive. The big thing that jumped out at me, one of the cards that kind of first got me thinking this thought and looking this line, is Plague Engineer is in this cube, which is very much like a punishing, prison-y kind of thing. This is a card where it's like, I'm sick of losing to Elvish Mystic and to Raphaelos. So I want to punish anybody that tries to do that against me.
I'll let them do it if they want. They just got to know that they could really get tased real hard.
You can play those cards. I'm just going to show you the door when you do.
Yeah. It's quite interesting when you are comparing this to the traditional vintage cube. I feel like that the traditional vintage cube can learn more from this cube than vice versa. I guess is kind of
sure. Yeah, I buy that.
Combining both of our points.
That makes sense to me.
Okay, well, what else? What is your takeaway here?
I think that the big takeaway is if you compare opinions on this cube, there's people that like this more than the Magic Online Vintage Cube. There's people that like it less. And in my personal friend group, we are divided on that camp, and there's nobody that's right. Okay, actually everybody is right. You are right about what you prefer, and seeing more different things in action helps inform your preferences. So I think it is very good, useful, and cool to spend some time playing other people's cubes, and this was a pretty nice example of that. And the direct contrast with this being a vintage cube also makes it a little bit easier to see exactly what's happening that's different, because you have a more direct comparison.
For sure. I assume you were in the I enjoy this camp.
I like this less than the traditional vintage cube. Apologies to Mr. Mingucci. I felt like I got vintage cubed, that expression, on average more often. Yes. I felt like more of my games slid completely out of my control based off of one swingy turn. Than happens in the regular vintage cube.
Yeah, which is surprising because Utopia Sprawl not present here.
Yeah, even without Utopia Sprawl, I still felt completely out of control of my life.
That's really saying something.
And I succeeded most often playing blue-white, like tempo decks, which are decks that I like well enough. But I disliked that a number of the decks that I typically enjoy drafting, or I will go into if the lane is open, mono white, mono red, mono green, the most obvious examples of this, they're just harder to draft. And some of the ways that make them harder to draft, like there's more blue cards, that's fine. Playing blue X is cool with me. I like blue, but I don't like putting Anticipate in my deck. Like there's just some of the extra blue cards are kind of horrible.
Yeah, blanket statement, never want to cast Anticipate.
Yeah, I've tried it. I try it now and again. I get tricked now and again. I want to see if Anticipate changed, if I changed, and it has never felt better. It always felt bad casting Anticipate.
It might be that might be the worst blue card in the entire cube. I'm looking through the list now. There's a non-zero chance that is the case.
It's very likely. The card is horrible. It's also like so. When you talk about blue cards in Power Cube, like you have the extreme Ancestral Recall, Time Walk. Yes, of course, all the cards are worse than that. But then you have Impulse, which is worse than the busted cards, and Anticipate is just slightly worse than Impulse.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, it's about 25% worse if I had to put a number on it.
Yeah, that's good math.
I love Impulse, but by that token, I think Anticipate's terrible. Because I like Impulse because it's exactly good enough, and like contextually, like not like if you're looking at all of the if you're talking about a traditional like cube, but I mean like for what we're doing here, Impulse is certainly good enough. Like, if you end up with Impulse in your deck, you're not going to be upset. Where you're going to be upset if you end up with Anticipate.
There are a couple cards in the cube that I think demonstrate cards that probably should be in the Magic Online Vintage Cube, which I am grateful for this experience for that. We talked about Land of War Visionary before. That's not in the Magic Online Vintage Cube. It is in MenguCube, and that's just a nice card. I think it's one of the better green 3-drops. And another big one for me, because I've played this in a lot of cubes, this is the first time I've played it in a powered cube. MenguCube has Sublime Epiphany. I have never lost a game when I have resolved this card.
Yeah, it's pretty dope, isn't it? It just feels good.
Yeah, and so like it has felt inappropriately powerful in every other cube I have played it in, and it felt at home here.
Yeah, I could see that. The thing I like about Sublime Epiphany is whenever you cast it, it feels like you have tricked your opponent into like your exact trap, but the truth of the matter is they could be doing anything, and that will appear to be the case.
Yes. Yeah, your opponent controlled a permanent, cast a spell. Like, I can't believe they would do that. They fell right into your perfect planning.
It's true, but that's what it feels like whenever you're casting it. It's like, yeah, I was waiting for you to do that. It's like, could have been anything. I could have been doing anything, and that's what the answer would have been.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, and this is me not drafting this cube. I love the theoretical concept behind this cube's existence, and I think that's the biggest takeaway for me and for everyone that's listening. Is I'm not saying you need to replicate this cube, not in the slightest, but the heart of what this cube is trying to do and what it cares about, I think, is how cubes should be put together more often than not. So that's my takeaway.
Yeah, cube with the cards you want to play with.
Yeah. Do you like, you love green and you want to just have more green cards and everything else? Do it. Absolutely. Have at it. A lot of great cards in Magic. You can do this now. 10 years ago, this would have been not really possible. It would have been possible, but not in a way that you could necessarily play it on a regular basis. But I think we are now to the point where there are enough powerful Magic cards where this is a realistic possibility.
Yes, yeah, there's just tons of options. There's more just generically cubable cards all the time, and also a lot more efficient thematic cards as well. So plenty of stuff that you can mess with, plenty of ways to make your cube your own.
Definitely. All right, you ready to move on to the last cube?
Let's do it.
Great. We're going to take a short break. When we come back, the Arena Cube.
Listen up, gamers. Taking a break from the pod to let you know how you can qualify for the Strixhaven Championship. That's right, the SCG Tour Online is back, and we're giving away cash prizes, tens of thousands of MTG Arena gems, MTG Arena Weekend Qualifier invitations, and Strixhaven Championship invitations. Go to scgtouronline.starcitygames.com for event information. The road to the Strixhaven Championship begins here with the SCG Tour Online.
All right. The Arena Cube, this is where my specialty for today's episode will lie. Ryan, did you have a chance to draft the Arena Cube at all?
Yeah. I actually downloaded Magic Arena on my phone because of Arena. I wasn't going to do it.
Yeah.
But I saw that the cube was back, and I had to see what it was like to cube on mobile, especially if I'm going to be creating as much cube content as I have been. I want to be on top of the whole range of things. So
every angle.
On that front, the Arena Cube, actually, I don't know if you know this, but I used to stream, and the first time the Arena Cube dropped, I actually streamed speedruns trying to get 7 wins as fast as possible playing Arena Cube.
Yeah. Well, that would have been a good thing to do in this iteration of that cube for sure.
Yeah, they cut one of my favorite cards. It's like a stupid uncommon, Charging Monstrosaur.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, Red Reality Smasher.
Yeah, I love that card.
Yeah, I love that card too. How many drafts were you able to get in? If you're just drafting on your phone, I imagine just a couple.
I've played a few on desktop as well. I've probably done 7-ish drafts of this run.
Okay. All right. That's not too few. I think I've done 12. I also did a couple on my phone. That was I have not drafted on my phone. I'm always scared that server issues are going to really mess me up when I'm doing limited on my phone, because I've found that the Arena app is not the most consistent with its connectivity.
Sure.
Compared to some other games I might play.
I was doing a draft, and I was in the draft portion, and I was kind of lamenting how much time there was between picks. I can handle that on my computer. It's 2021. I got 2 monitors. I got music going. There's plenty of stuff going on. On mobile,
your phone,
though, I could
that's the
feel
only
every
thing you
second.
got.
And so, I tweeted to complain about how slow the draft was, and I actually missed a pick while I was tweeting about
it. Okay. Oh, man. Well, so I have had, I like I said, I've only drafted a little bit more than you, about 12 times, but I have taken a lot of time to think about this. The first week that this this cube was back on Arena, after kind of just reviewing the list, visually going over the text list that Wizards provides directly before they put the cube live for all of their cubes, seems to be how they operate. I took some time, about 30 minutes, to go through and just verbalize all of my assessments as I was going through all of the cards. I did that like on the first. I streamed 2 days a week, so this was on the very first stream that cube was available. So I've had a chance to kind of go through, and like we said at the top of the show, for me this is really important, both for myself because I want to be successful at doing this cube, and for this content that we're making. I feel like the Arena cube is going to change less from time to time than just about any other cube. Well, any other cube that we might be talking about today, like a brief time cube. The Vintage Cube is probably going to change least from time to time. Legacy Cube is going to change least from time to time, but contextually for the short period of time cube. So just some general notes I have. I actually think that the update that they did for this cube was one of the best ones that they've done. Not because I specifically liked all of the cards they added, but they took away a lot of the cards I did not like. Because I just felt like they were generally underpowered. And they replaced them with less than embarrassing cards. There were some that they took out that I liked. I also quite like Charging Monstrosaur. Just as an aside. Yeah, I don't know if that was on this last time that they took it out.
I think it's been gone for a little while.
Yeah, I think it is too.
The point that you just made actually really speaks to me is some cube cards are on the very powerful win more often than not when they show upside, and they maybe shouldn't be in a cube if that's the case, but it's a little bit louder to me, especially if I'm scraping for playables, if there's a card in the pack that just I would never ever want to play. And cutting those cards does a lot to improve the quality of the average cube draft.
Yeah, big time. And I actually think that seemed to be because I'd seen those cards and noticed some stuff like holdovers from previous drafts, and they really just took, they took the scalpel to the bottom half of this cube, the bottom 10% of this cube, and really cleaned up a lot of that stuff. I felt like that when I was drafting, I regularly would end up with cards like in the last 3 picks that I was like, I actually, this is actually a reasonable card for either my deck or someone's deck, which is like a really critical play experience for me in cube. That's something that I always focused on my cubes, like what cards are just not seeing any play, what cards don't fit, rather than trying to increase the top level of the cube. And I'm glad they've taken this approach here. It took them a little while, but I think that's finally where we are.
Yeah, that's the thing that I think it's different from me and a lot of people that own cubes, but for me, it's really easy to cut cards from my cube. Like there's always something I'm looking to cut. It's like this slot could be more powerful. So I'm really excited when it's time to add new cards.
Yeah, for sure. For this, they did add a lot of new cards. They added a lot of Kaldheim cards. As obviously a portion of what Wizards is doing here is for all of their cubes, all of the cubes that they are designing, there is a non-zero portion of that being a marketing tool. So every time that a new cube comes out, you're going to see more new cards that are maybe not going to be long-term additions, but are in there for a brief period of time because they're from the newest set, Kaldheim in this case. Now, before I get to like my breakdown of this cube, I want to call out a couple of things. And I actually want to talk about some Kaldheim cards that I played with and against that I was extremely impressed with. Two of which are cards that you specifically like. One of a card that I like, and then a card that I dogged a bit. The card that I dogged a bit that I thought was pretty awesome when I had it was Magda. It was a rare, like being able to have a rare piece to have acceleration to go from like 2 to 4, because there's a lot of powerful red 4-drops in this cube, whether you are being very aggressive like Torbran, or if you are being more of a mid-range deck like a Rekindling Phoenix or a Chandra. And as long as you're like trading and making a treasure, I felt like that was often worth it for Magda. So I actually liked that card more than I thought that I would.
Okay. That makes sense. Certainly in Arena Cube, I value Captain Lannery Storm very highly in this environment. Cards are very similar in nature, so that just makes a lot of sense to me.
Very much so. I actually think, and I was comparing those, two cards to one of my friends last week. And I actually felt like Magda's a little bit better, but that's only because of the curve considerations and the fact that this cube does have a tendency to go slightly bigger on red than a bunch of other cubes do. You're talking like, the 6-mana Chandra, other cards like that are really encouraging you to elongate the game. There's a lot of more expensive stuff. Chandra Awaken Inferno.
Good amount of mana sinks too. Captivating Crew. Hazaret the Fervent. A lot of stuff you can dump your mana into. Siege Gang Commander actually performs much better in this cube than it does in any of the Magic Online offerings.
Yeah, for sure. So that was one card. Another card I was incredibly impressed with, and I actually came to believe this was one of the more powerful cards in this cube, which was Toski, a card that you loved, and every time I played with or against that card, it was a nightmare or a complete joy as I was beating my opponent's head in.
Yeah, it just keeps the cards flowing. Very difficult to answer.
It sure does. Yeah, and let me tell you, the curve of anything into Toski, into Tindershoot Dryad, it's difficult to beat unless you kill the Tindershoot Dryad immediately. Anyway, the last card that we actually did not mention that I think I would retroactively put back into my top 5 for Kaldheim was Isika's Chariot. I drafted that card a bunch of times, and it was good 100% of the times I drafted it. I think I had it 4 different times, and it was always great. And that was just a card that I looked at and I was like, this seems pretty solid, but I actually think that that's a legitimate cube card, and probably a card that I will be evaluating for more cubes in the future.
Yeah, I think that's a card also that can hack it in Vintage Cube. The more I see it in action, this card has been quite impressive.
Yeah, been a big fan of this.
Yeah, this is actually one of those cards when you talk about. I mentioned a card that can win the game on its own. A vehicle that accrues more value, that crews itself, is a big deal.
Yeah, very, very, very much so, and it truly does. That was the card that like I ended up drafting it, I think, in my very first deck, and I was like, oh man, this is much better than I thought it was going to be, and it continued to be good. And then I started seeking it out after that. So,
I actually have a card from this cube that I want to shout out that
was
on my Kaldheim top 10, but was not. Our podcast, we did personal top 5s. And this is literally was my number 6 in my article. But this card showed up in both the Nega Cube and it's in Arena Cube. And every time my opponent has had it, even if I know they have it, because it's a flash card, you leave up mana for it, there's nothing I can do about it in a lot of games. And that's Sigrid Godfavored.
Yeah.
It's just such a huge blowout in combat. It's a 3-mana 2/2 with first strike and flash, and it can exile an attacking or blocking creature when it enters the battlefield. Like, this card just consistently 2-for-1s me, and in a lot of the games, there's just nothing I can do.
Yeah, that first strike, I didn't put enough respect on the first strike initially. But that is like, the difference in this, how good this card is by having first strike and not having first strike is like night and day. Because it just kills, you're just getting two things. And there's a lot of ways, kind of referring back to the last couple of cards we were talking about, there's a lot of ways to make tokens. So you just eat a token permanently, and then you just eat another small creature. And then it doesn't even matter what this card does for the rest of the time.
Mm-hmm. And a fair amount of the removal in this cube. I draft a lot of the red decks. A lot of the removal I end up playing is just sorcery speed. So it's like, they're just never going to cast that until I force them to.
Yeah.
And they're just going to really put me in a bad spot by having that card in their deck.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, so overall, if I'm looking at, either colors or color pairs or archetypes, I think that if I had to identify two specific decks or colors, I would just say decks in general that kind of archetype related that I would consider the best, the tier 1 decks in this cube are mono white aggressive decks and green ramp decks. And those were the ones that seemed to be consistently being able to operate their game plan and be the most interchangeable with cards you could have to be able to make sure that you can be consistent when you're drafting those decks.
So
specifically, go ahead.
I guess I have two questions.
Okay.
How many colors are you playing in your green decks? The first question, you can answer that.
Like, not
so
even
the reason that I'm asking is because I will very rarely pass a pack 1 pick 1 Field of the Dead, and like 5-color green is a deck that I really try to draft in this cube.
Well, I will get to that because the next thing I was going to talk about is the best individual cards.
Okay,
so,
sure.
Spoiler alert.
But are you saying this applies to mono green and then any number of additional colors, or where are you
mono?
That
yes, so it doesn't have to be mono green ramp, but green ramp specifically, where green is your base color, and then you're able to branch out in any other way because the fixing is actually really, really great in this cube.
Mm-hmm.
And I love to draft lands in general, which, again, this is foreshadowing, which we will come back around to in a second. But the green ramp decks, I always felt like as long as you're focusing on that, focusing on being able to advance your mana, you can slot just about anything into your threats and the middle of your game plan. And it always seemed like it would work out because green just has, in this cube, has so many must answer threats where you absolutely have to kill them within like a turn cycle or they're just going to take over the game. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of them. Pretty much everything that costs like any creature that costs 4, 5, or 6 in this cube that's green has to do with those. It's like the couple of planeswalkers that they have. So there's a million different options to just toss in for, I'm going to just have something to fill my curve, but the focus is going to be ramping and trying to be able to access as many different colors as possible without losing the base green. That seemed to be the most successful. And then just mono white aggro. Specifically mono white. I think mono red is good too, but I think mono white is better personally. The 2-drops that white has are pretty awesome in this cube. Like, a lot of them are like can just start taking over the game. Adonto Vanguard, Clarion Spirit I actually saw be better than I was expecting it to be. I lost way more games than I was expecting to the card Grateful Apparition, which pairs very nicely with Luminarch Aspirant, Season Hallowed Blade, and of course Thalia. You may have heard of that one.
I have heard of that one.
First Strike is actually quite good in this cube. But they've really fleshed out white. It has the second most creatures after green, but it's a lot more focused. It is focused on making sure that you are aggressive as possible, and that's pretty common in a lot of cubes. But I actually felt like most of the powerful white cards are really present in this cube for an aggressive deck. So I found myself drafting those and having a lot of success.
Sure. I also do like mono white a fair amount. That's a deck that I pretty easily have gotten the maximum wins with. I have a preference for red, and I can't really tell you how much of it is whether I think it's better. I enjoy playing it more because I have had success with both of the decks, and I am more interested in taking a dumpy red card out of a pack than a dumpy white card. But
yeah,
some of that is just that's what I enjoy doing. But
I think red has the higher ceiling. Mono red has the higher ceiling because you have cards that, I mean, your cards on like your individual cards, the top 25% of your cards are better than the top 25% of the white cards. But I think the floor is higher for white.
Sure, I buy
that.
That
makes sense. Yeah, I mean, like if you're playing a Torbran, that's going to be better than anything white can have on curve, just at all. There's nothing they can do that's better than that.
Glorybringer also just like one of the better cards on the cube.
Yeah, for sure.
All right, so here's the other question that I had, and
okay.
Given the way that you've been talking about this, based on everything I know about you, I assume you're going to be upset that I even asked. I'm very confident I know what the answer is, but the question is, best of one or best of three?
So, the answer is slightly different than you might expect.
Okay.
Because I did 90+% of my drafts while I was streaming. And for streaming, I believe best of one to be superior to best of three for viewership.
Sure. You see more decks.
You see more decks. You do the draft portion more, which people really enjoy. I like playing best of three Magic more than best of one, just in general, just because I'm old, I guess. But
that's what I was getting at. You are very old.
Yes, thank you. I forget sometimes. I gotta be humbled. So I drafted, I think 11 best of ones and 1 best of three with this one.
Okay.
But that's because I drafted almost like 10 of my 12 drafts were on stream. So
makes sense.
There were only 2 that were not. And then one of those I did was best of 3. One of those was very unfortunate best of 3 because it was the one draft that I drafted on my phone, and I forgot to adjust the main deck. I drafted at lunch and then like I'll play later, and then I loaded it up on my phone and just hit play and did not change the cards out of my deck. So like the last several picks of pack 3 were just in my deck, and it was just a mess.
Yikes.
And I was like, this could not have been, like, I could not have done this with a worse draft. The best of 3. Anyway.
In the last year and a half, I have done a pretty serious 180, and I'm so casual now, dude. I fire up the best of 1 cubes, even for constructed. I play best of 1 more often than best of 3 on Arena. I don't give a shit about a sideboard. Come on. I'm not here to play quote unquote good games. I just want to do my thing and move on to the next one.
I've just drafted so much best of 1 because I do it like when I'm streaming. That's what I'm in limited. I just play best of 1. So the amount of limited I've done, cube or otherwise, in best of 1 to best of 3 has been like 95% to 5% over the last year. So no, I mean I think best of 1's fine. It's snappy. I like snappy. I don't like wasting my time. There's a lot of wasted time in best of 3.
I would totally jump into an Arena Cube bot draft too. Can you imagine how quickly you could do that?
Blaze through it. You finish that draft in like 8 minutes.
Somebody said that, I think Ryan Sachs, I expressed this opinion publicly, and Ryan Sachs said, that seems a little bit too much like Supreme Draft to me. I was like, that's you're just making me more interested. Like, it doesn't always feel like there's other people drafting at the table anyway. Like,
yeah, so what's the difference?
All kinds of random shit wheels all the time. I don't care. Just do it fast.
Yeah. So you were talking about, and you preempted my next thing I was going to talk about, which is the individual best cards in the cube. I think without a doubt, hands down, the singular best card in this cube is Field of the Dead.
I'm basically there, yeah.
I am 100% there. And I already draft, basically, unless you are drafting mono white or mono red, you should be prepared to draft a Field of the Dead when it comes up, which means you should be drafting on you should be focusing on drafting lands or cards that can turn into lands on the backside.
Yes, I draft lands much more highly in this environment than I do in most cubes.
Yes, and you really should, because Field of the Dead, I think, is just the single best card.
And
just period.
Something that I write about when I talk about cubes, I'll single out gold cards that I really like. I also mentioned that I have a specific preference to being monocolor in a number of cubes, monocolor when I can be monocolor. In Arena Cube, if I'm looking at a card in a second color, or even a particularly good gold card versus a land, I'm going to take the land because I want to be able to cast whatever comes. The power band's not that wide, and like you said, just staying as open to Field of Dead as you can is very important.
I think it's critical. I literally, out of all of the decks, I had one color deck, which was actually mono green, which was ironically the best deck that I had. I just slaughtered people. I think that was the quickest draft that I had. And then I had two that were, one that was green black, one that was green white, and then every other deck was 3 or 4 or Golos colors.
Mm-hmm.
Basically more than 3 colors, but I just had a Golos to be able to activate it. Speaking of which, I think because of everything we just said, I also draft lands super highly. The triomes in particular in this cube are excellent, and I think they're some of the best cards, and I will draft them over if I think it's going to be like a middle portion of a card in my deck. Like if a card is going to end up as like not one of the worst cards, not one of the best cards, I'll draft a triome over it if it's in like 1.5 of my colors.
Mm-hmm.
Just because the ability to splash, because the power level is generally so flat, just being able to draft these lands, you'll figure out playables. And you can start putting together like a cohesive deck in the second part of the draft if you have your mana base sewn up. And this is something that I say for a lot of cubes, but it's even more critical in this cube because Field of the Dead is just the best card.
And this is also reinforced by the notes that you had on this update. A lot of the worst cards have been removed from the cube.
Yep.
The average playability of the average card has increased. So just get your lands because they contribute to some of the more powerful stuff happening anyway, and you will get cards you can play. Don't pass like the absolute upper echelon. Like I'm never going to pass a Sublime Epiphany for a land.
Yeah.
Maybe a Field of the Dead, but
sure.
in
a
general,
mana fixing land.
take
A
the
mana
lands.
fixing land.
Yeah, exactly.
Field of the Dead is it's a land in type only. You know.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I draft lands super duper highly. My favorite deck that I had was a Grixis Field of the Dead deck. Actually, I think Control is a little below average in this cube, like blue white and blue black control, only because there's a lot of quite good aggressive creatures. It's not that you can't do it, but it takes a lot more effort in the draft to be able to make sure that you have enough removal and card draw and threats.
Mm-hmm.
So it's more difficult to put it together. It's not that it's not as good, because you can have a control deck that's great, but it takes more effort to put together than if you're drafting any of these other things that we've talked about.
Right. Another thing I like about the red deck and why I'm a little colder on control is there's a couple really resilient threats. Like I don't take very much over Phoenix of Ash, and when I draw that card, I would like to see the stats. I feel like I never lose when I have Phoenix of Ash on turn 3.
Yeah. Yep. I mean, I totally agree. I think that's why control is difficult, because it's really difficult to line up your counterplay, either your removal swells, your target removal, your sweepers, your own threats, which turn into just blockers. They're not even threats really in a control deck.
Mm-hmm.
It's really difficult to line those up with the myriad of ways that the mid-range and aggressive decks can attack across the board.
The range of stuff you're going to run into is really wide. And we've been talking about Field of the Dead being so good. Playing against Field of the Dead is way different than playing against Magda, you know?
Yeah.
Probably the coolest deck that I've drafted in this run was a base blue-green Field of the Dead deck. And most of the games I won, I just ramped into Platinum Angel and left up Sublime Epiphany the rest of the game.
Yeah.
And whenever I fired it off first, I copied the Platinum Angel and the game was over.
Yep. That's pretty sweet. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I don't know, I actually quite enjoyed this version of the cube more so than I have in the past. Like I said at the beginning, it's because they cut off the chafe at the bottom half, but it really does a lot of what I really like doing, which is actually wants you to draft lands, because I love to draft lands as is. Like one of the last drafts I did, I was telling one of my this is the one that I drafted on my phone. I was saying, like, I think the best card in the cube is Field of the Dead, and actually I don't need to say friend. It was Steven Green, and he was like, well, what do you do if you see Field of the Dead in pack 3? You don't get to draft it because you can't draft it early enough. And I'm like, I'm drafting lands so much that if it comes in pack 3, I'm going to be more prepared to draft it than the rest of the pod because I'm taking the lands. So I'm always going to get it.
Right.
And sure enough, in that exact draft, it came up and I picked it like pick 5, pack 3.
Nice. Yeah, that's a really good point about the card.
I have 11 non-basic lands right now that I'm playing.
It's a really good point about the card. Whenever it shows up in pack 3, like, I see it so much in pack 3.
Yeah.
It just always gets passed to me.
Because people are not prepared. They're like, I haven't prioritized lands enough. I've focused on all these other things. And if you don't, you have 45 cards that you're drafting, especially in this cube. Your worst card is not going to be that difference in power level than your 5th best card. It might be difference in your top 4 cards, but your 5th best card, it's not going to be like all that different from your, like, the worst card in your deck. When you're getting to, like, as far as like what is making your deck, because you're already going to cut 10 cards that you're not going to play if you're not drafting lands. If you're drafting like two mana fixing lands, that's 43 other cards, and maybe 2 or 3 of those at the very end are cards that you just had to pick up at the end of the pack. So contextually, we're talking about like 10 to 12 cards, and then everything else are cards you're playing. That's 35 cards, and you got to cut that down to 23. You're cutting another 12 cards on top of that because you just refused to draft lands, or you didn't focus on drafting lands. And all the while, I'm drafting lands, and then you pass me Field of the Dead, and then it doesn't matter because now that card is better than all of those cards that you're in the middle part of your pack that you picked over lands. Draft Field of the Dead and draft lands. That is my main takeaway for this game.
And the cube supports it super well. I think one major thing I want to say about this cube is, mentioned I really like mono red, you like mono white, mono green also pretty well. I've had some good mono black decks. I haven't really seen mono blue represented too well in this cube, but I'm sure it could happen. It gets messed up a little bit by the mill theme. There's a few too many blue cards that are just like bad to play.
That's exactly what I was going to say. It's exactly what I was going to say. They put like just enough focus on them. And the thing is, like, you can play a mill deck, but you need to have like, I think there's like 7 mill cards in the cube, but the top 2 of those are like significantly better than all the rest. So if you have 5 of the 7, but you don't have Teferi's Tutelage and you don't have Rune Crab, then it doesn't matter a whole lot what else you have. Ashiok is like a close third. But that's also very dependent on the rest of your deck, because if you can't hold it off from creatures, then it does nothing.
Where do you put Folio of Fancies combo?
Last of those mill cards, but that's only because it requires the most finesse to make that work.
Hey, and you're saying it requires the opponent to play ball, I think, is the problem.
That's what I mean. Like, well, I mean in the game.
Sure.
Like, you actually have to, because there's times you could just draw that and you're like, well, I will never, not only can I not cast this because I cannot take off 3 mana to cast this spell, but it's going to be a liability for me to spend my mana to activate it. And that's what I mean.
Other games where you draw it and it's like, I win. So.
Yeah, I don't have to cast any other spells. Yeah. It's the least. it's the least flexible of any of the mill cards, because everything else it's like, well, you can it costs you nothing. Like Teferi's tutelage costs you nothing. It costs you playing Magic for the rest of the game.
I put Rune Crab in my control decks just more often than not.
Those two, I mean, I think you should do the same with Teferi's tutelage, because you could just play it. You could just play that on turn 3, and if your opponent has like other blue mana and you play it on turn 3 and resolve it, you just play Magic until they run out of cards and you win.
So before we started talking about mill and mono blue, the point I was trying to make is that this cube does a really good job of incentivizing both monocolor decks and 5-color decks in a way where both feel viable and good. And I think that element of the design is very well executed, very cool.
Yeah, I totally agree. Those are the two, mono blue and mono black. I had never wanted, there was never enough from a power level perspective that encouraged me to play mono black. So that is an archetype I did not try. I did mono red, mono green, mono white. I tried the almost mono blue, which was the mill stuff. It was like mono blue splashing black for some removal. But mono black was actually the one that I never felt like I was pulled enough in that direction, but I did play against it a few times.
I had the nut mono black deck once, and I did win all of my games with it, but it is a pretty specific cast you're looking for. Like, again, it's like the big time, historically powerful cards, Priest of Forgotten Gods, the 1 mana 2-power creatures, Crypt Breaker is a very good card, Knight of the Ebon Legion is pretty important to have that one, and like Scrap Heap Scrounger, card that I continue to be offended is not in the Magic Online Vintage Cube, just like an all-time great cube card. You need a lot of this stuff for the mono black deck to work.
Skyclave Shade's also a really great card.
Yep, yeah, very comparable to the Scrounger.
Yeah, those are all just generally good cards. Yeah, if you can get all of those, I can definitely see that deck being good for sure. Especially if you're like finishing off, you just got like a random Gray Merchant. So when you play it, it's like, all right, we'll just take 6, I guess. Yeah,
well, the mono black Splinter Twin combo is Ayara, First of Lochthwain, Nightmare Shepherd, Gray Merchant of Asphodel.
Yep. Yeah, that's a let's see, on its face that's 14, right? With nothing else. Yeah, 14. Yeah, it's pretty solid.
Yeah, well, it's also +1. Like the Gray Merchant itself does
it's
14.
You're right, 16.
The Ayara also
16.
triggers. Yeah,
Ayara. Yeah, 16. Yeah, sure. Yeah, get you.
It's pretty good.
That is pretty good. You don't have to do anything else.
Well, you fly in with your Shepherd, and that's 20.
Oh, you're right. Oh man, you could literally you could do nothing. You could do Swamp, Ayara on turn 3, which actually is going to drain them. Nightmare Shepherd on turn 4, which drains them, and then Gray Merchant, they're dead. Yeah, all right. I mean, I like that.
That's the dream.
That. Yeah. Let's see. I guess my takeaways for this is draft lands. Don't worry as much about, for every pack, the middle of the pack, the lands are just going to be better than the other cards. And you'll know when you have enough lands, because you'll be like, I need to get to 23 cards. So fortunately, Arena is quite easy for you to tell that. And I know that sounds simple, because that's like a thing. It's like, well, of course, Justin, you don't want to end up with less than, you don't want to end up pick so many lands that you have no playables. But again, the point being, if Field of the Dead shows its face, you can draft it. Also, there's 3 5-color cards in this cube. There's Golos, Tireless Pilgrim, which I think is excellent. I think that's an awesome payoff for being 5-color, and I think that card's actually just generally good. There's Asika Tree, God of the Tree, which I think is fine, but usually too much work to make it worthwhile. And there's Niv Reborn, which I think is absolute dog shit. I had so many people cast Niv Reborn, and I never saw the most I saw anyone draw off of Niv Reborn was 2 cards, and most of the time it was 1. And I saw whiffs.
It's not competitive in a lot of the games.
Yeah, I don't think I lost to it, and I saw people trying to do it frequently. And even one time I was like, I guess the best thing they could do is Nibblers and Board, and then they cast it immediately, and then they got like 2 completely irrelevant cards off of it, and I was like, all right. It was like Warrant, Warden, and like Doom Foretold, and I was like, all right, sure. So those are my takeaways. I'll be excited when this cube comes back. I did quite enjoy my time playing it this go around.
Yeah, definitely one I intend to keep playing. So Justin's big note, draft lands, feel that's great. My big note is this is the cube that I have played where both 1 mana 1/1 with some nominal text and 2 mana 3/1 with whatever amount of text. I would play Blade of the Six Pride in this cube. Like those two bodies perform better for me in this cube than they have in any other cube I have played creatures of those sizes.
100% agree. Yeah, 100% agree with that. Okay. Well, we'll see when this cube comes back. We'll see what kind of changes it looks like, and we'll talk about it then. Anything else for the Arena Cube today?
That's what I got.
All right, that's what I got too. Thank you everybody for listening to the 540 today. Remember to subscribe to this podcast wherever you're listening, such as Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon, Stitcher, YouTube, whatever local podcast app you might be listening to, maybe on your phone or your other mobile device. Leave us a review if you are able. That certainly helps get the word out about the 540. The algorithm loves to eat up reviews, and while you can put whatever you want, we always appreciate a nice review. You can say the words, whatever words you want, but if you're like, this podcast sucks, 5 stars, that's great. Have at it.
Love it.
Yep. So you can find me at jparnell1 on Twitter, and of course my other podcast, Think Twice MTG. You can search that on any podcast application. And every week on Commander Versus. And like I said, I stream twice a week on Twitch, twitch.tv/jparnell. I usually play half of the time I play Limited, half the time I play Constructed. If I could play Limited all the time, I would probably just do that, but I'll play Constructed a time or two because that's what the people want. What you got, Ryan?
You can find me at Ryan Overdrive on Twitter. You can find my articles on StarCityGames.com. This week is something that is in some ways heavily specialized, in some ways is opening up something that I've gotten a lot of positive feedback from. So what it is, I am converting my Grixis cube into a 2-player cube. That is, I have done that. So I have taken a cube that was 360 cards that you maybe have played at 540 cards and made it 180 cards. And this is in one way exploring a completely degenerate combo focused only for the most entrenched, not for the faint of heart cube, and a lot of notes on that. And in other ways, is an adaptation of the 2-player cube, the 180 card cube model, and how that can be further explored. Something I'm very excited to continue to work on. So check that out. Hope you like it, and you can find any updates on that sort of thing on my Twitter at Ryan Overdrive.
I'm excited to check that out personally.
It's been a lot of fun.
I'm sure the other people are. Did you spend a lot of time working on it? I know you've spent many words on this podcast talking about those things. So
yes, ton of time working on it. Something that I go into in the article. What's been the most interesting and the most fun for me is finding cards that are very good in the small cube environment that would not have necessarily been on my radar for a 360 card cube or a 540 card cube. Stuff that plays better when you see the best cards more often, the kind of like role players that gain value in that kind of environment.
Oh, I love that. That's awesome. Yeah. That's such a great little thing to dig into. And then it's whenever I've spent time doing that, I always feel like that my work is always paid off when you find those cards.
Yeah, when I'm putting a card in my cube and I'm really excited about it, and to my knowledge, nobody else is cubing with it, that's the best. That's the actual height of cube draft for me.
Yep, that's great. All right, make sure to check out Ryan's article this week, and of course, every other week, as he's been putting out a lot of cube content.
Oh, yeah.
Putting out a lot of cube content. Ton.
You're welcome.
Thank you. That's the show for this week. That is the 540. Thank you, everyone, for listening. and we will catch you next time.